Q&A around 2 Timothy 3, verse 5, Cotton Candy Christianity. And one question I had, I found this kind of interesting. It's a cool title, but not only that, if you're a brand new Christian, how do you move from being a brand new professing Christian to becoming a powerful Christian?
As newborn babes, desire ye the sincere milk of the word that you may grow thereby. 1 Peter 2:2. Nothing mysterious about it, nothing magical about it. It's through the ingestation of the word of God. You know, Jesus in John 17:17 talked about what theologians call progressive sanctification, which is just a fancy theological term for spiritual growth. And Jesus said, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. In other words, spiritual growth results from the word of God. You know, we said this, I think, last week. The Spirit of God takes the word of God and makes the child of God more like the Son of God. The more you get into the word, the stronger you will become, which means we all need to apply Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Richly. Get into the word, saturate your mind. You know, we quoted earlier Romans 12:1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world. But then the next phrase is very important. But be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. So how do you not be conformed to this world? It results from being transformed by the renewing of your minds, and you become transformed by the renewing of your minds through the ingestation of the word of God. It's all about the word, David. It's all about the word. The Bible is the word of God is living and powerful, Hebrews 4:12, and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. It is powerful. It will cut, it will transform, it will change, it will alter. If you attempt to be a powerful Christian apart from the word, forget it. Quit while you're ahead. Stop. It ain't going to happen. Just not going to happen.
Okay. I heard you once talk about the will of God, and I think sometimes we can feel powerless when we're trying to discern what to do next in our life. And you had a really good example, or 5 points that you gave or whatever, but how do you go about discerning God's will when sometimes you feel extra powerless in getting your feet to even move in a certain direction?
You know, Christians very often want to know what the will of God is for their lives. It's important to understand, number one, that the will of God will never contradict the word of God. When I was a young pastor, a couple came into my office and wanted me to marry them, and they were living together. And I told them that was unacceptable. They said, no, it's not. We know God approves of this. We know we're at peace with this. And we know this is the will of God for us, that we're living together. And I said, look, the will of God will never contradict the word of God. So first of all, if you want to know the will of God for your life, at least the general will of God for your life, the general will, get into the word. The word of God provides us with the general will of God for our lives. Well, what about the specific will of God for our life? How do we discern that? Well, through a number of ways. Number one, through open doors. You know, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 16:9, a great and effective door is opened unto me, and there are many adversaries. So we can know the will of God through open doors. That's one of the ways that help us discern what the will of God is. Proverbs 11:14, in the multitude of counselors there is wisdom. Getting godly advice from godly people helps us to know what the will of God is. Also, I think it's important that we use what's called sanctified common sense. You know, come now and let us reason together, Isaiah 1:18. The Lord has given us noggins, brains, and for us to utilize those brains is important. when we reflect upon the specific will of God for our lives. Lord, I'm going to reflect carefully on this. I may take a sheet of paper and divide it in half and write the pros on one side and the cons on the other if I do this or that. Also, there is a subjective element, I really do believe. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God, Romans 8:14. I believe that there is a subjective element to knowing the will of God for your life. God is not going to whisper in my ear, Don, go to Delta Airlines this afternoon, pick up a ticket to France because I've called you to be a missionary there. He's not going to do that. But can the Lord burden my heart for the people of France, the wonderful people of France, like the VMs? Can God burden my heart for the wonderful people of France? Can he burden my heart for people in Haiti? Certainly he can do that. We have to be very careful here because there's a fine line. God does not speak to us today in the same way that he spoke to Daniel or Paul in terms of propositional revelation, but he can burden my heart. So how do I know the will of God for my life? Well, first of all, the will of God will never contradict the word of God. And it's interesting what R.C. Sproul one time said. He said, young people want to know the specific will of God for their lives. How can you expect God to reveal to you his specific will when you're not even following his general will? I mean, you're operating at variance with his general will, and now you want to know his specific will for you? Why don't you begin by following his general will? Love Sproul. Love the way he talked. Sproul was really a mentor of mine. I kept my theological teeth on R.C. Sproul anyway. So the general will is found in the Word of God. And then you have the multitude of counselors. You have open doors. You have common sense, sanctified common sense. And there is a subjective element where the Lord can burden your heart for this or that or something else.
Thank you. Yeah, I really find that very helpful.
Okay. The
Yeah.
important thing is this. A car is a lot easier to steer when it's in motion. You can be paralyzed and sit on your bed all day. What is the will of God? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go there? The Lord understands you're doing the best you can. Start moving. Start moving. And the Lord will direct you.
Yeah, I think what you mean there is really start serving somewhere. And if it's not where, yeah. I appreciate that. All right, let me go to children again. You talked about kids in college living a powerful life and not being stained by the world. And also, I think a lot of things, you're building patterns at a young age that lead into character at a later age. The next verse next week is one of those difficult passages about a person who has conceived such a level of ungodliness that he starts to be a predator, basically. Basically, I'm asking, how can you be powerful in college without building any worldliness in your life? And what are some specific steps for kids that are going in college or high school?
Say that again. How do we say it again, David?
How does a young person start to build habits of a powerful life, no matter the surrounding, whether it's in high school or a family where there's temptation all the time?
David, I think it's important that we understand that, we are going to be tempted. There's no question about that. Luther said, I can't keep the birds from flying around my head, but I can keep them from building a nest in my hair. I can't keep the birds from flying around my head, but I can keep them from building a nest in my hair. We are going to be tempted. And, to a large degree, the Christian life is a matter of discipline. And, believers in Jesus Christ, some believers are disciplined in many respects, but when it comes to operating consistent with biblical principle, they let their disciplines fall by the wayside. Christian young person, if you're going to a secular university, And I realized that, I've been through the whole academic experience up to a doctoral level. I realized there are assignments after assignment after assignment. Uh, but if you're too busy to read the word every day, if you're too busy to pray every day, then you're too busy. Something's got to give. Maybe you're taking 18 credit hours and you need to drop it to 15. It's a matter of building patterns of discipline into your life. You know, the former pastor of Highland Park Baptist Church, Len Crowley, told an interesting story one time. He said that when he was going to Talbot Theological Seminary, he decided instead of just looking casual, he was going to wear a tie to class every day. And so he would wear a tie to all of his classes. And a friend of his got into the habit, the discipline of looking better than he normally did when he went to seminary. It was just a discipline. It was a patterned approach. And sometime later, this individual said to him, you know, I would have slept with my girlfriend if I had not established certain patterns of discipline, just in terms of looking well, wearing a tie to seminary, certain patterns of discipline strengthen me in other areas of my life and enabled me to resist in other areas of my life. I thought what Len said there, some of you who are listening have attended Highland Park Baptist Church. Look at, you discipline yourself. It's a matter of discipline, and the more discipline that you incorporate into your life, discipline feeds upon discipline. It's important to keep that in mind. And the basic disciplines have to be the study of the Word of God and the memorization of the Word of God. You know, Swindoll talks about the fact that one time he was on a speaking tour and he was in an elevator, and these two girls got on the elevator with him, these two young ladies, and they asked him if he was busy that night. Would he like to have some fun that night? And what immediately went through his mind were verses that he had memorized in terms of not giving in, not submitting to the lust of the flesh. Immediately went through his mind. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. And then he went to his hotel room and immediately called his wife. I guess he was shaking on the phone while he was talking to his wife. But look, discipline feeds upon discipline. And the basic disciplines that we need to have, that we need to incorporate into our life, is the Word of God and prayer, and also witnessing. You know, people who witness and see individuals come to a saving knowledge of Christ, I mean, that breeds excitement. Man, that individual got saved. It encourages you. You want to witness more. But if you don't witness, you'll never experience that. You'll never experience the joy of leading somebody to Christ. And man, once you experience that, that is like, wow, I got to do this again. Who's the next guy? The nearest guy closest to me now, I got to go talk to. Maybe it'll happen again. So discipline breeds discipline, and the basic disciplines are the Word of God and prayer. You're too busy for that. Guess what? I don't care how busy you are in school. If you're too busy for that, you're too busy.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like that. One more and try to answer it quicker. But there's a real important aspect here in the Bible, and it mentions all the time, and pastors seem to care about this a lot more than members. And I say that because it is a pastoral duty a lot of times when it gets rise to a certain level. But this passage specifically says, avoid such men as these, you know, that idea of being unstained. why is it so important for a church to avoid those who are professing but not having power?
Well, because as Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And Paul said later on in 1 Corinthians 15, evil company corrupts good manners. He that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. You know, this is why it's important as believers in Jesus Christ that we hang with believers who are committed to the Lordship of Christ, because they're going to encourage us to be more committed to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. You know, you want to pick your friends carefully. Now, that does not mean you can't interact with unsaved people. Although I must tell you, David, like I've noticed this, and I've told my kids this, you know, I have a hard time interacting with unsaved people because they don't get me and I don't get them. Like there's not, it can be superficial. Like I can talk superficially to my neighbor, but look at deep, there's no, I can't resonate deeply with them. They don't resonate with me and I don't resonate with them. Now, that doesn't mean I shouldn't interact with them. I should for the purpose of witnessing and evangelism. But, you know, you don't want to rub off negatively. You don't want a person who is either an unbeliever or a believer who is walking in the flesh. You don't want them to rub off on you negatively. Well, maybe I'll rub off on them positively. Well, usually the opposite occurs. They rub off on you negatively. You have to be careful. I mean, there are some very strong Christians who can, and certainly, you know, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye that are spiritual, restore such a one. We have to rub elbows with Christians who are walking with the Lord in order that we might restore them. All I'm saying is when it comes to that, when it comes to interaction in a general sense, we have to be careful. We have to know where we're at in terms of our walk with the Lord, how susceptible we are to negative influence. We want to have a positive influence. Okay, how susceptible am I right now in my walk with the Lord to negative influence? Got to be very careful here. Is this guy going to, what's going to happen here? Can I impact him positively, or is all that's going to take place is he's going to impact me negatively? So you just have to be very, very careful. And, you know, look, believers who are walking in the flesh can have a negative impact upon a church. They can gripe, they can complain, they can tear down. They can be like Diotrephes in 3 John, who loveth to have the preeminence among them. They can be on a power trip. They can be on an ego trip.
Yeah,
you know, somebody
that's really...
and you know, you don't want to, you know, as a lay person, you have the right to critique, but you certainly want to be supportive of leadership. You want to pray for your elders. You want to be supportive. You don't want to, yeah, some Christians, every opportunity to tear down or to say something negative. And you don't want, a church can't go forward. And this is why Paul says, from such turn away. From such turn away. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Purge out, therefore, the old leaven, that you may be a new lump. Very important, David. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I wanted you to address that because I think it's important. It's all about having a sanctified church, a beautiful bride for Christ. And what this means, and the Gatzmans just commented, new believers generally lose their old friends, not by one's own choice, but because the friends tend to drop you. And that is really true. And guys, listen, we don't want a church where, you know, we're afraid to deal with sins in our lives because of friendship. It's about God's bride. And that's really important. I just pray that we continue to be a church like that.